Welcome to my second rebuttal video of the Ravi Zacharias Ministries series on the existence of God, where it seems that the same group of wide-eyed believers claim that these are important arguments, yet have never clearly, intellectually considered any of them. This time, I take on the experiential argument, the claim that because lots of people say they have direct experiences with God, that somehow proves something. It doesn't. It just proves that lots of people are credulous. So let's get right into the fray.
The experiential argument for God's existence, I think, is a huge one, and it's a very valid one. I mean, just if we look at this objectively, the vast majority of humanity, from the beginning of time to the present day, believes either in the existence of God, the gods, or something beyond reality. The atheist or the agnostic community are a very small percentage in actual belief around the world. Now, why is that? I think that's because our actual encounter with life, with conscience, and with reality drives us to assume intuitively that there's something.
Indeed they do, but that doesn't make any of the things that they believe actually real. If you look throughout human history, a huge number of people have also believed in ghosts, in dragons, in monsters, in evil spirits that cause bad things to happen. They've also believed in vampires and werewolves and magical golems. Humans really have a pretty poor track record of keeping their superstitious beliefs to only those things that actually exist in reality. And the same goes for gods. Gods are a symbol of man's ignorance, a desire for man to find answers to questions that they have, until recently, had no rational means to address. It is true that, also until recently, atheists and agnostics made up a very small percentage of the population, and the reason for this is twofold. First, it hasn't been until recent history that science has advanced to the point where these God beliefs were no longer necessary to explain our place in the universe. Today, more and more people are walking away from religion because, as we currently understand the world around us, religious ideas are utterly absurd and nonsensical. The second, and most important reason, is that theists have worked tirelessly over the centuries to keep atheists and other heretics down. The Catholic Church, for example, openly persecuted non-believers, imprisoning them, killing them, and socially ostracizing them because they didn't sign on to the dominant social delusion. In some parts of the world, this continues, such as the recent murder of atheist bloggers by Muslims in Bangladesh. The religious are terrified of anyone who doesn't share their views. This has led to open warfare, not only against the non-religious, but against other religions. It's not that hard to understand why atheists haven't been able to come forward until today, when the religious have lost their power to persecute those that don't believe their religious nonsense.
Our sense of desire, our longings, our aesthetics, our love for beauty, for something bigger than ourselves, it's all these transcendent longings that we have. In addition, it's also people's religious experience. And so again, you look over thousands of years of history and millions of people who claim belief in God. How is that unreasonable, or irrational? It doesn't seem to be. So these are all witness and testimony from our human experiences. We are, for example, finite human beings who have these great transcendent longings. How do you explain that? Longing for legacy, for beauty, for truth, for goodness.
So in reality, we're just talking about wishful thinking, the desire for there to be something out there to watch over us when we really have no evidence at all that such a thing actually exists. Just because lots of people believe a thing, that doesn't make it actually true. People used to believe the earth was flat. They were wrong. People used to believe that evil spirits caused disease. They were all wrong. People used to believe that the sun was carried across the sky in the back of a chariot and that bad weather was caused by gods tossing around lightning bolts. All of these things are things that lots of people believed, and they were completely and totally wrong. But then we get to the core of the problem, a problem that theists will simply refuse to acknowledge. None of these things are testimony. None of them are reporting events that actually happened to the believer. They're just assertions made without evidence for things that the believer has no means to actually demonstrate happened. Some event that they cannot immediately explain occurs. They claim that God did it. How do they know? How did they identify God? What tests did they put it to verify their beliefs? Well, absolutely nothing, of course. These are just empty stories told by the gullible who really, really, really wish that they were true. But nobody with half a clue ought to take them at all seriously.
And that's the way I think many people come to know God. I think of, for example, of my own mom, who was very, very committed to Christ, but she had no idea. She could not read or write. She had never heard of the Kalam cosmological argument, could not give any coherent argument for God's existence. But I can, for that reason, say that she did not know God. And so arguments can actually, as William Lane Craig has pointed out many times, they can actually be a distraction to our coming to know who God is.
Maybe it's very telling that his mother couldn't give a coherent argument for the existence of God because, just like this argument from experience, none of these are actually coherent, intelligent, or rational. William Lane Craig is not a rational person, no matter how much he wishes he played one on TV. He's the same person who claims that if he ever found evidence that God wasn't real, he'd reject it because his beliefs are more important than the facts. I think that's very telling because, like the argument from experience, it makes feeling good about the things you believe more valuable than actually having belief in things that are actually true. It's comfort over fact. It's fantasy over reality. And that's not something that anyone ought to be proud of.
A friend of mine once said a man with an experience is not at the mercy of a man with an argument. And that doesn't mean to say that experience in itself is totally exhaustive, but it is part of what we have. I have to account for my experiences. So let me go back again. That when I walked into this house in Scotland many years ago and was shared ideas about the existence of God, I came in completely predisposed. There was no God. In fact, I was morally repulsed by the very notion of God. So there was no experience of God, except that there had been in my childhood senses of something.
But you have to account for your experiences rationally and critically, and you're simply not doing that. Instead of stepping back and examining your experience, whatever it was, with a critical eye, you're just picking the first emotionally comforting solution that you can invent and demanding that your experience must have been caused by that. That's not how rational people operate. We look at the experience. We only go where the evidence leads us, and if we cannot come up with an intellectual explanation, we admit that we just don't know at present what happened. We do not invent things out of whole cloth to make us feel good. We just don't, and neither should you. If you can't demonstrate that God is real, then you can't say that you had an experience with God. How would you know that? Where did you get that information and how did you test it? You might as well be saying you had an experience with Santa Claus.
There, if all we are stuck with are just arguments, philosophical arguments or arguments from science and all that, if that's all we have, we are still a step away from really knowing God, which is what God has called us to do.
And you are right. It is hard to convey an experience to someone else, but you absolutely should be able to describe your thought processes for how you explored your experience. Saying, "I just know," isn't a rational way of looking at things. And worse, you don't have any scientific arguments, and your philosophical arguments are really, really piss poor. You have nothing but your own wishful thinking and emotional coddling that makes you insist that there's a God, even if you have no actual evidence to support it. And you expect us to take you seriously. Why is that?
I think experience is a pointer. It's not exhaustive, but it is something very significant. When you look at the great people across history, from the Apostle Paul through C.S. Lewis, to people like William Wilberforce, to Ravi, to myself, to many others, experience is a part of the reason we believe in God. It's not the sole reason, but it is a very important one.
Of course it isn't exhaustive. You haven't even made an attempt to examine your experiences intellectually. You just pick a solution that you like and declare that must have been it. If I have an experience that I don't understand, I don't immediately leap to the most emotionally comfortable explanation. I look at it from all angles, trying to decide what actually happened. And if I'm unable to do that, if I'm at a loss, I'm honest about it. It's only intellectually honest if you do that and live your life by those standards. Acknowledge your ignorance and continue to look for answers. Don't pretend that you have an answer. that you cannot possibly have just because you desperately want an answer. I know I say that non-believers laugh at believers over things like this, and it's true. We just look at your childish ignorance and shake our heads. And yes, I said childish, not childlike. You're adults. You should not be this gullible. You should not be this emotionally fragile. If you are, then you have problems, and that's something that you need to handle through psychological counseling. A lot of people think I'm unnecessarily hard on theists, but really, I'm not. There is an intellectual, rational, and critically valid way of looking at the world, and then there's religion. We're better than religion now. Sure, there was a time when we didn't have the tools to see through the veil of religious absurdity, when believing in gods to explain the world around us was, if not strictly necessary, at least somewhat understandable. We are hardwired in our brains to seek out answers, whether we have the ability to actually find those answers or not. But we've not only evolved this big human brain that is capable of overriding our base biological programming, but we've developed science, the only mechanism we currently have that allows us to objectively study the world around us and find real answers. But you have a lot of people out there who just don't care about the truth. It's easier and more emotionally comforting to just buy into unsupported and unjustified claims than it is to deal with reality as it actually is, and that's just sad. It isn't even that these people are admiring the emperor's imaginary new clothes, because there isn't even an emperor. There isn't even a kingdom. These people are just deluded. Anyhow, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, and share. Let me know what you thought in the comments and all that. Keep the suggestions coming, and I'll do my best to get through them. Until next time, think. You have to counterbalance the people who refuse to do so.